questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live? There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate Podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us at the Cultivate Podcast. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor at the Grove Church, and we have here with us Mark Freeman, who is also on staff, one of the pastors at the Grove Church, and also a relationship expert, a friendship building expert, a engaging with your faith in the community expert. Is that, I feel like that's what we kind of, over the course of now, this will be the fourth episode we've kind of done in this series about engaging with people from other faiths. I feel like we've kind of honed in on your expertise. Would you agree?
I agree that that's what we've tried to do.
Like that is a really difficult position to put someone in. We have determined that you're an expert in this, correct? Do you agree that you're an expert? Like, please, that's tough. That wasn't fair.
Doesn't your definition of expert include not giving up? Because if that's it,
not giving up,
yeah.
I feel like you're about to quote Rocky to me.
You become an expert at the thing that you just are
10,000 hours.
Right.
You think you've put 10,000 hours into building relationships with people from other faiths?
Oh yeah.
Write it down, guys. Expert Mark Freeman, expert in building relationships.
Man,
with
I'm glad we put this
faiths.
to rest.
Wow, 10,000 hours. Someday I need to make a list of everything I feel like I've done for 10,000 hours or more, which would theoretically.
Those are all your areas of expertise.
Yeah. I feel like I'm an expert Razorback basketball fan. I think I've done 10,000. I have to do the math on that. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of hours. If worrying about it counts, then
oh yeah.
Anyways, thinking about it, that's all it takes. Anyways, we're way off topic. So this all started because our church had a summer seminar where we're teaching on different topics. And what we've been doing over the last, few months is I've been interviewing, or Abigail has been interviewing me, depending on who the speaker was, on these different topics. So your topic was engaging people from other faiths. And how do we do that? And now this is the fourth episode that we're recording on this topic. And I think it's in part because I keep trying to get you to tell us like the answers that people want you to give, and you just keep giving different answers. It started with you just talking about the gospel, and that if we need to understand people from other faiths, we need to understand first the gospel and how the gospel separates Christianity from everything else. That I find hope and life with God through Jesus by grace through faith, or there are rules-based approaches. And there's Jesus, and then there's everything else. And so we started there. And then we spent some time. Well, let's just at least try to talk about, even if they are all one category, let's talk about the distinctions within the category, because I think people are interested in that. And I think it's helpful for people. So we spent some time talking about that. And so then last one, we were going to spend an episode talking about, well, how do I then now, understanding all of that, how do I talk? And I thought it was going to be one episode.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Well, I think you and I were talking about it beforehand. I think you said it was going to be two. And I was like, I don't know how it's going to be two. And it's clearly two, because I was thinking about all the different obstacles that people have, and you were just giving such good, and I think the phrase I used last time was paradigm shifting kind of advice on that the conversation was good. We're just going to keep it going. So sometimes we don't know how to start. How do I start? How do I even, I've got this person in my neighborhood and he's a Muslim. Where do I start? And what was your answer?
Be and make a friend.
Yeah, it was so simple. Why does it matter that they're Muslim? Just be a friend. Right. Just be a friend.
And you said a minute ago, I mean, it's good to know enough to maybe make some, but
to not bring them bacon as their housewarming
gift. To be considerate, and also a core to all of this is just being genuinely inquisitive, like really curious. And so, hey, I'm getting to know you, and I don't really, I may make some assumptions, but I really don't know much about you. Let me learn about you, and I really am curious to know.
Right. So then it starts with friendship. So now maybe I can believe you. I'm just trying to build a friendship, but now I still feel this pressure to transition from regular friendship to talking about Jesus. And I don't know how to make that transition. So I said, Mark, how do we make that transition? And what did you say?
Pray for it and be looking and waiting expectantly and courageous enough to go there when the opportunity arises. Trust.
You just keep making it so simple. You just keep making it so simple. So I believe that God wants me to have this conversation. If I believe God wants it and I want it and I'm looking for it, then I trust that it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are our first two hangups. And maybe, hopefully, you've gotten us past that. And so now I'm talking to them. We're talking about just life in general. Like you said, maybe I'm being inquisitive and they're telling me a little bit about them and their background. And then they say, then something happens, and now clearly it's like, okay, it's happening. It's happening. Oh, so I saw you guys heading out on a Sunday morning. I guess you guys were going to church. Do you guys go to a Christian church? And now we're here. The moment we've been waiting for. I didn't get there the way that I thought. I thought I was going to have to drop the whammy on them, which is now shorthand. If you didn't, you know what I'm talking about, you didn't watch the last episode, you need to go back. So instead of having to drop the whammy on them, we've now gotten to this point organically through building friendship, through trusting God. Now I'm here, and it's happened. Now what? What do I do?
Well, man, I think we make this part, just like everything else, we make it really complicated.
Oh, here we
So
go.
Here we go. That's what made me laugh. No, so if you have heard this good news and responded to it yourself, then you know what to say and how to respond because you have experienced it.
But I've not been trained in how to share the gospel, maybe, or maybe I have. Like, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Like Romans Road,
okay.
The bridge. Isn't that what
okay.
You're saying something different?
Yeah, I'm saying that. I mean, there are tools that we can add to this to maybe help it, and anybody could maybe with some of that training feel a bit more confident or be able to communicate it a little bit more clearly. But at the core, you are speaking from experience. That's the reason God uses us, because He's changed us.
Right.
And then we testify. We bear witness of what God has done and is doing in our lives. And so that's one reason that it's not something to be like, oh man, okay, now how am I gonna? Because friendship is built on me telling and sharing things that are important to me and things that I've experienced and found true, and trying to understand from your life experience what you're experiencing, what you have found true.
So there's a few different words that we will use to describe the process by which we talk to somebody about Jesus. Very often we'll talk about, hey, it's important to share the gospel. So we use a sharing metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
We also use the word evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both of those words have a presentation or a communication of facts and ideas to them, which, again, I'm not putting a negative spin on those things. You used a different word. You said witness, which, again, is a common word that people will use. Like, it is important for us to do witnessing or to witness. We'll use it as a verb. That and it's Christian slang for sharing the gospel. But you use the word witness in actually a much more literal sense. You didn't mean it as shorthand for share the gospel with friend. You meant witness as witness. Mm-hmm. So let me just ask you, let's just hang on this word for a little bit. I'm not trying to share the gospel. I'm not trying to do evangelism. I'm trying to witness. If that's what I'm trying to do, what does that mean?
That means that in the natural conversations that we have as friends, when the moments come up that spiritual conversation is happening or where I'm asked a question, then I am testifying of the things that I've experienced to be true. That I'm not making it up. I'm not trying to do the necessarily like, hey, here are these things that somebody, I'm saying these are things that I believe in my heart and I have seen to be true. It's crazy the way that I've talking from our last episode, when you're praying for those opportunities, often the thing that will happen is the person will share something that's going on or ask a question, and it's directly related to something that God has just taught you, or a story from the life of Jesus that you just read that morning. If that's something that you're doing personally, if you're experiencing it personally, then you speak of it because you can't be silenced, because you want to testify about it, because you're experiencing how true and powerful it is in your own life. And so you easily speak to it. It's right on the edge of your tongue. You're not having to go reach back to something you learned back in 5th grade.
Right. I love that. Right. So I'm telling them about things that God is teaching me, how important my faith is to me, the thing that I have, that I'm gaining from my connection with Jesus, being a part of a faith community. But there's a point in which I feel like that I need to explain the gospel to them. And all of this is possible. The reason why I experience this is because of what Jesus did on the cross. And I need to be able to explain the gospel to someone who probably has significantly less familiarity with it in a clear and coherent way. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that? Or do you feel like that just kind of swapping stories, at least for a while, is good? Does there come a point in which I need to, and let me just kind of explain to you what Christianity really is and how I feel like it's distinct from maybe other world faith traditions that are. What do you think?
No, I think that's critical but it's critical also for me to just explain why Jesus is so important to me. The reason because he's not just a God that I follow. He's not just somebody that I'm hoping will, add to my bank account. No, he's this. He's everything. It's by grace from him through faith in him that any of this is even possible. So it becomes the core of the story, the reason why.
Right. So I think that's really good, because I think that's a simple one-off connector. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about all of this, but I'm talking about it not in terms of because I go to church, because I am, quote, a Christian, but I tie it to Jesus, which makes it a really easy one-off to tell you, here's what Jesus did that makes all this possible. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And in the very first conversation, and this happened to me last week, the very first conversation, when we start to go there, then for you to understand it, why it's so important to me, I really have to speak to that a little bit. What's the story? How did I meet him? Why does it matter so much? I have to give you some of that for you to understand me.
You can't know you can't really know who I am.
I can't just, what you have to know is that this is the reason it's you're going to hear me talking about this in our friendship, because this is what happened to me. I was lost and now I'm found. I was,
So how equipped do you feel like I need to be able to have that aspect of the conversation? So I think that can be an obstacle for people, is like, I don't feel like I can articulate Christian truths well enough. So it is better for me to say nothing than to accidentally convert them to some other religion.
I know everything feels like an oversimplification, but it really is to me. If you know him, if you have believed in him, and you're in him, then you can speak about him. There's not some can you always get better? Can you always get clearer? Can you always, the more you're comfortable, I mean, like over time, yes, all of that's true. But if you've experienced it yourself, then evidently you know enough. I'll never forget, there was this guy named Marcus when I was doing collegiate ministry that got to see him for the first time really understand the gospel and respond to it. And then we met back the next day. And Marcus, he shows up and he's like, man, what was last night? Like, man, it was awesome. He said, man, I got back to my floor in my dorm and I told everybody on the dorm floor about it. And I was like, man, that's beautiful. Like, and without me trying to tell him that he should do that or anything. Right. He just was like, I'm so excited about this. I can't be, now did he do it perfectly? Right. I'm sure, but man, in God's grace, I guarantee you, there were people that heard it that day that had heard it for the first time from somebody who was genuinely life changed. Right.
I had this experience once. I was on a mission trip and I was paired up with this other person that was on the trip with me, and we were taking turns being the one that was going to share the gospel. And she went, and what she said made no sense. No sense. I mean, it was the least comprehensible piece of gospel presentation and theology I've ever heard in my life. And then the person that we're talking to, she asked him, do you want to receive Jesus? And he's like, I do. And I'm like, wait.
Hold up.
Why don't you tell me what you think you're doing? And what I heard back from him was one of the clearest, best articulations of the gospel that I had ever heard. And I'm like, okay. It was amazing, which I think points to something, which is maybe God's involved.
Maybe, just maybe.
I mean, it's
that seems to be the thing.
Like what we talked about before. It's like God is going to get you to that moment. And it's not like at that point, God's like, well, I got you here.
I'm just going to leave you.
Good luck, buddy. Do your best. You're like, oh, man, you just taught heresy. Now you're condemned too. I mean, it's just not what it is.
Well, and we also don't know which hearing for this person it is. Is it the first time they've ever heard it? Is it the 25th time?
Right.
What things has God already made clear to them in their journey that, sometimes there'll be one part of it that I really feel compelled to speak to. I'm not sure why, but it's amazing how sometimes that's the question that they've asked or the thing that we're talking about. Yes, I didn't do all of the gospel justice, but it was because this one part of it was really important at that conversation. And then maybe the next conversation, it's a different one, Recently, I've had some friends that it was just like, man, they understand the gospel, but they question whether that God is really a God of love that loves them. And they needed confirmation of that one piece of the truth,
And not knowing the fact that when I met you, you were already at 3. And my job is to get you from 3 to 5. And God's going to hand you off to somebody else, or maybe you are at 0. And all I'm doing is spending a year or two just cultivating the very difficult soil that a 0 can be.
Or a -5. Because that's another thing that the friendship reveals, is that maybe there's some baggage or some pain or some false truth from the past that we need to talk. We need to get to that, but that takes friendship.
Yeah. And we feel that sometimes we can feel a pressure. We got to close the deal, and anything short of quote closing the deal, however we define it, is a failure. When you just talking about Jesus in front of somebody, to mix the metaphor, got the football down the field a little bit. Just got us a little bit closer. But I think too, the other thing I was thinking as you were talking, I think it is really just as simple as just understanding and kind of making central to the way that you think about your faith the phrase, Jesus died for my sins. And there's a lot of theological depth there, but it's a very simple thing. And so, and then I use that phrase like, well, who is Jesus? Okay. What does his death have to do with anything? And what is sin? Right? I mean, it's like there's a naturalness to that I think that if we could just make that just kind of a really understanding, not making it more complicated than it needs to be, but also not just being like, well, this is just kind of how I vibe and how do you vibe? But it's really like, here's the cornerstone for me. Jesus Christ died for my sins. And I can tell you of my experience for that. But if I can keep it coming back to that, then a million great gospel conversations can come out of that.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. I think us, both being curious, but curious to the degree that, hey, so how do you answer those big questions of life?
Right.
Like us asking some of those questions and genuinely like listening and considering, if we're going to expect that somebody else is going to give a true hearing and consideration of the things that we've experienced, we got to give them the same thing back.
Right.
And so a lot of times the reason we get the chance to speak is because we've given the chance to speak. We led with our ears instead of our thoughts, And a lot of times there are things that someone may say that's really true, especially from another culture, because they've just had a different life experience that we have. And there's some truths that maybe we just haven't been exposed to, like, for lack of, that we assume there's only one side of the road to drive on. But not everybody does that, and I can tell you the reasons why that makes sense. And
right.
And so there's things that we find that are like, hey, well, that's true. That thing you just said is true. And then there's something else that your friend may say that you're like, okay, I don't understand that. Like, I get this and this, but that thing you just said, I don't understand. Could you explain it more to me? Not because we're trying to say, I gotcha, you're wrong, but that we're going, okay, as I try this on, it doesn't fit.
Yeah, so that helps me out here a little bit, because I had another question, and you're kind of dancing around it. So I'm going to kind of ask it a little more specifically. You can keep saying what you're saying, but I want to. So like, this all started with the question, how do I engage people from other faiths? And I think there's an expectation both at the summer seminar and in this podcast that you're going to tell us about what other faiths believe and how to give a counter argument to the things that they say. So far, you have not said anything about how important it is for me to have a knowledge of their faith. Because I think that's one of these things. I need to know what Muslims believe. I need to know that they're wrong and why they're wrong, so that when we are debating religion, I can win the debate. That seems to be a lot of it. And it's not that you've mentioned that a little bit. You've mentioned it never. And I don't seem like you are going to. So is it important? Is it important that I have knowledge of someone's religion before I engage with them or as I'm engaging with them?
I think it's really, really important that you have a clear understanding of the gospel.
Okay.
And then when something is said that's not that, then you've got a good enough friendship that you're willing and boldness to say, hey, I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me more? How does me, doing this thing every week or praying this many times a day or giving, how does that right all of my sins? Like questions that stem around, hey, that's different than the gospel in this way. Tell me about that. But
not in a combative way.
But not in a combative way, because you're really curious. How does that work out? Because as I've tried to work through it, it doesn't work. I tried that early in my life. It wasn't called Islam. It was called the good church. What do you want to call it?
Dude, I feel like you're about to drop a denomination name on us, and you just swallowed it 4 times.
I'm not.
Like.
But even in the seminar, I added not a denomination name but there is a truth that in the Bible Belt in particular.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
I
tried it when I was living the Bible Belt culture.
There's a works-based faith. That's not faith. A works-based religion. That's not the gospel.
That is Christian adjacent.
And it is the same as
it's really more
else.
Just a Bible Belt culture. In the same way that Hinduism and being Indian are the same, there's a thing when Bible Belt and Christian are the same, but Christian is actually different than that.
Right.
It is about what Jesus did.
So if I know the gospel really well, whether it's that or a world religion, I'm able to go, oh, hold up. Explain that more to me, because that I haven't seen that part's the part. And I can also affirm all the things that you say that are true. Man, is it good to help the poor? Yes. Let me and this is how Jesus has taught me about that. And is it good to meet with other people of the faith together and worship? Yeah, man, it is. Let me explain more what that looks like, or explain more to me what that looks like for you. But then when there's something that's not, that you would really have trouble with, or that you have experienced trouble with, like,
Right.
well, so how many times do I have to do it though before God's happy with me? What's the magic number? As I'm saying it right now, that might sound like an aggressive question, but in the context of a friendship, I'm genuinely curious.
Right.
I want to understand. And that's the reason it's also really difficult to put people in boxes, because I've just seen that their answers to those questions, person to person, it just differs, I
mean, all jokes aside, I think the reason why you are, quote, an expert at this compared to me is I feel like in those situations, I'm always trying to win the conversation. I think that's what I'm trying to do. I think sometimes in these kind of contexts, I know too much for my own good. I'm asking you what you believe, and I genuinely don't care because I already know. I just want to hear you say it, so I can tell you what my pre-planned response to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see it in even worse places out there where certain faiths or certain founders of people's faiths have a checkered past, or even after they supposedly came to this new knowledge, lived a life that was problematic in some way, or their followers have done something problematic. And then I use that. Well, if this is real, then why this? If this is real, then why this? And it's kind of like not coming out of friendship, not coming out of what makes their faith personal to them, but based on my generalized knowledge, pre-knowledge about what is wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've, especially in some times that I've interacted, say, with just like Mormon missionaries or people that I know who were Mormon, they weren't people to me. They were combatants.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed to win. I needed to make sure that they walked out of here just a little bit defeated and a little bit discouraged about themselves and their faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it could not have cared less that their name was Tim and James.
Right.
Didn't matter to me. And you're putting us on a different track.
Yeah, and it is, paradigm shifting is a good, because I feel like, you could pick apart, oh, but that's not bold enough, or that's not whatever, or this is, but really at the core, I'm just saying, hey, they're people. God, I feel like we miss it if we miss that Jesus came to seek and save the lost, and the model that he gave. I mean, you're hard pressed to go through and look at different interactions and say, oh, these are the 5 things that must be included in every gospel presentation.
Right.
Boy, I challenge you to do that with the life, what we know about Jesus's conversations, right?
Yeah, part of me just feels like that there have to have been at least 10 minutes worth of conversation between Jesus and Zacchaeus that just weren't included. Like, how did we get from I'm just coming to hang out at your house for dinner to Jesus looking at him and saying salvation has come to this house today? Like, well, they just for editing purposes, they just took all that out. And I'm sure obviously there were some conversations that happened, but if it was critical, if these particular aspects of the conversation were critical, then they wouldn't have excluded them.
But I think the critical part was there. He went to his house.
Right.
And what did the naysayers are all like? He's befriending.
He's befriending a sinner.
These sinners.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the core that I think it just gets missed. And then, now we're doing something else. We're not following the model that we were given.
I really do like this paradigm shift, because I mean, again, it's not about having the right questions to ask them to kind of attack their faith, or being able to make sure I can give the right answers to the question they're going to ask me. Because I think sometimes we talk about it in terms of I need to take a stand for the truth. Right? I need to take a stand for the truth, or somehow I need to defend God. It's like I have to defend this roaring lion.
Right.
I just need to point people.
Yep.
Like, look, right? I mean, he doesn't need defending, and roaring lion is probably not the right metaphor, but I just need to just hey, here's Jesus. Here he is. And I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to take some stand. I don't have to be right. I think right and wrong. I have to be right, wrong, win, lose.
Yeah, all that.
Love well, point to Jesus.
Yeah. And trust that he's big enough. I mean, he is the one that's seeking after them. And again, loves them more than you ever could.
Yeah. And some people will use that as an excuse to not engage in good conversation. But I don't hear you saying that either. No. Engage in good conversation, ask them questions about their faith, challenge them with good questions about things about their faith that don't make sense with the gospel. Talk about how Jesus has changed you. So engage verbally, but trust in God, not pretending like I have to win and have to have all the answers.
Right. At the end of the day, someone, how will they hear unless someone goes and tells them? I mean,
right.
There's a part of it, a privilege of it that we get to be a part of, and have true friends. That's what life's about, right?
So essentially for 2 hours now, 4 episodes, you have just been unleashing just incredible nuggets of truth and challenge on us, paradigm shifting, help me, just all sorts of encouragement, right? And the last thing I would want to do is to wrap this up, and then you're holding on to one that I haven't asked the right question for. Do you have anything else, any final pieces of wisdom or advice or encouragement for people who may find themselves right now in a situation where I've got a friend, or I'm trying to get a friend with work in my neighborhood of someone who practices a different faith? Any other bits of wisdom, help, or encouragement you might have?
I mean, maybe one last thing I would say is that, at least in my journey, the reason why it's so important to me is that I think that we grow, and our growth is stunted without it. And we really grow in the midst of these kinds of conversations, where we're being forced, or, we're being challenged to love somebody big, where we're learning about something and then going back to our own faith and testing it, and where we're trusting him and watching that question come up, or that opportunity come up, that's the dance with Jesus that if we just keep it to ourselves, that we never get to experience. I mean, that's just on a personal front, not to mention the life change and the relationship with Jesus that the other person gets to experience. But I'm just saying, on a personal note, man, it is a growth. A huge part of our growth is Christ followers.
That's awesome. That's a great final word. Mark, thank you so much. All jokes aside, I think your wisdom that God has given you and the experience God has given you and engaging with people just really at a friend and heart level, it's an encouragement to watch and to hear about, and being able to hear you encourage us with just kind of these powerful truths about how to take those steps to do it. I think it's been really good. So thank you for real. And thank all of you for joining us as well. I encourage you again to go back, not only to listen to the previous episodes where Mark and I were talking, but the other topics on summer seminar as well. We've got another one that's coming up on end times revelation stuff. So you can look forward. Question mark?
Great. Yeah. Look ahead.
Look forward to that. I guess, forward. And that's not pleasantly, but you can at least, you can look to it. You can look forward to that in the future. And if you have any questions about any of the things that we're talking about, or maybe even ideas for topics of things that you'd love for us to cover in the podcast in the future, you can email info@thegrovechurch.org. And we would love to hear any questions, concerns, interactions you'd like to have. We would love to hear from you. And as always, we'd love for you to be a part of our congregation in any way as possible. And thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Cultivate Podcast. Our hope is that you are taking steps to go deeper in your faith, that you are asking big questions and you're looking for answers. We hope that we can be a resource for you through our podcast and any other way that we can help you. You can find all our episodes anywhere that you can find podcasts, including YouTube. And again, thank you so much for joining us.